One of the things I think you should know about our guest speaker this evening, who is going to be answering more questions, I think, than speaking. But Ms. Marcus is the chair of the State Water Resources Control Board, and they are the folks that manage our drinking water and water quality regulations and implement the state's water rights laws. You'll remember from the last time she was here that she was appointed by Governor Brown in 2012 and within a year was designated chair. That is all part of the theory that cream rises. Before relocating to Sacramento, Ms. Felicia was headquartered in San Francisco, where she served as the administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Region 9. That was during our Clinton administration, or as someone in the audience said, the first Clinton administration. Earlier in her career, Felicia has also headed the Los Angeles Department of Public Works. She has led us through the first round of water conservation regulations, and her board is now poised to consider a second round of regulations. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me as we once again welcome Ms. Felicia Marcus. The microphone is yours, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Which chair did you want?
Right there. Oh, I can do it here. Perfect. This
You can if you wish.
Perfect.
Or you can stand behind the podium.
No, this would be better. Hi. Whoops. Well, thank you very much for the invite. I'm just going to say a few words to open because you all heard from me quite a bit the last time. But the first thing I have to say is a bit of chagrin. I didn't know it was my schedule that made it a Friday. I thought, that's weird they want to do it on a Friday. Sure, whenever it works. So I'm sorry somewhere in that, but I thought I'll do it whenever. I just said, find the earliest time that works for them, and I guess this was it. So my deepest apologies to some of you for any inconvenience, and my thanks for your willingness to come on a Friday night. That's so funny that I thought it was you. So thank you a lot. A little chagrined by that. I also want to thank you for inviting me back again so that we have a chance to have a conversation. Not just the two of us, but actually I'm as interested in hearing from you as in answering questions. It shouldn't just be about me, because this is something that we're all in together, and I'm actually always looking for company and wisdom and good ideas. For me, I mean, maybe I've done a lot of different things and a lot of, I feel like Forrest Gump or something, because for some reason I keep being pulled into funny roles in kind of an odd way. But as many of you heard me say last time, my experience at Public Works was my defining adult professional experience. And it's something that I wish more people in other avenues, whether elected officials or environmental advocates or anybody, could really understand how hard it is to actually do the public's business and figure out how to keep the water flowing, or in my case, keep it flowing after people have used it, or picking up the garbage every day, filling potholes. I mean, the day in and day out work of keeping our civilization humming is something that people take for granted. And I know we'll talk about this a little, that many many people pride themselves on the fact that people don't have to worry about having clean, safe, affordable water coming out the tap. And there's a source of pride, and there should be. It's an incredible advancement in civilization. I mean, there really actually hasn't been a time when people other than the rich have so much access to clean, safe water, to sanitation, to be free of disease. I mean, it's a miracle that we live when we do. The flip side is that all that hard work can be taken for granted. And we just have to figure out collectively how to turn that around, and many of you are real experts in it, but it is a miracle in what you do. And those folks at Public Works were the most noble, humble people I ever met in my whole life, because they got no credit from anybody for anything, and they just got, to use the right word, I'll just say dumped on by the city council whenever it was convenient. I always felt that the lowest rung of hell was reserved for people who do that.
I think that's the technical term, yes.
Yes, yeah, I can think of others. But I grew up, 40 years. In the 4 years I was there, I'm very proud of the work that we did, and very awed by the folks I work with. So that's a kind of experience I know I share with you, and it's really very important. So just thank you for all that you do. And also, as I said last time, thank you for your leadership in the country, in this hemisphere, and in the world, in the forward-thinking work you've done to prepare this community to have an economic future that's robust in the face of growth and climate change and all of that. So I spent this morning at the recycling workshop that some folks in South County did. Santa Margarita organized it, and it was just inspiring to meet with many of you, but also to just hear people's plans and what they're trying to do. It was just, I felt it was like going to church or something. It was wonderful to have this sense of really wanting to do things for the community. You have to realize I do spend a lot of my time working with 19th century issues and with folks who want no change, and it is a pleasure to be around folks who are trying to drive a positive future. So I've been basking in it today, and it's really been terrific. I know that the conservation regulations are controversial, and we talked about that a lot last time. Hopefully we can talk about that, but also talk about other things. But I want to thank you first and foremost for the amazing performance of you and your customers. It's just nothing short of remarkable, and on top of what you've done over the years, and it's been stunning actually to see the reaction. Where are we in, and we'll talk about this more, where are we in setting? It expires in February. We said we would take time, and we've had a work group, and we've done myriad meetings. My staff have had hundreds of meetings, I'm sure, if not more. I've had more than I can count with individual water agencies and with associations and with others to talk about issues now that we've had more time to figure out what are the real issues that are challenging people. And as you've seen, the staff came out with an informal draft just to get more turnaround of conversation, and they made some more changes, and they've come out with a formal draft regulation that gives some credits for a number of things. Some of you may, and it's not that these were the only good arguments, but these were the arguments that we felt we could administer without doing violence to the whole point of them, but there's a timing issue to raise. But where we really heard the issues, whether it was the climate issues and what evapotranspiration rates really are. I mean, again, away from all the drama and emotion, we've had a lot of very productive conversations, growth since the date, the incredible investments in augmenting water supply, et cetera. And so there are some credits in there that can be stacked or not, can take people up to as much as an 8% lowering of their targets. And for many groups that puts them well within the bounds of comfort, and it gives them, I think importantly, an opportunity to say that tremendous effort was acknowledged. Other things people have suggested doesn't mean it's out of the question. They're just harder to implement in a way that aren't going to potentially lead to someone else being in worse shape. Remember, thinking on this was not just this year. It was, oh my God, what if we are in our own Australian-style millennial drought that's going to go on for years? They said that they had thought they were in their usual 3 or 4 year drought cycle for about 6 years. And then it rained a little, and they thought, phew. Kind of like some people, but no one in this room are saying phew. And then they had the 3 worst years yet. And what they said was, conserve early as you can, because they had to hemorrhage billions of dollars they didn't need to in making everything an emergency. Now, they've done incredible things. They've got some insurance policies, but they would have much rather been able to do it in a more steady trickle. And so we're at this interesting point. I don't know what, we're in early innings if it's a ball game, where we've had some very encouraging precipitation, even more encouraging than we were getting, because it's actually falling up north and we're getting snow, as opposed to you all being drenched down here, which has its benefits, has its downsides, of course, from the mayhem flooding can cause, but it could help the Colorado system, it could help with folks who are capturing stormwater, et cetera, but really for the backbone of the system, we really have a premium on snow and reservoir storage up in the northern Sierras, and we are getting precipitation there now, which is good. But it's just last week we finally started getting any appreciable runoff because it was so dry that all those storms were just soaking in to the soil. We got some snow, which is good. Eventually it'll melt out, and a lot of it will get in reservoirs, and the rest will replenish stream flow. But our reservoirs are still below average in most cases, alarmingly so in some areas. Snowpack's above average for this time of year. That's nice. Not out of the park, but that's nice. It could melt if we get those warm El Nino rains that were predicted. So it ain't over till it's over. But we're at a point where we need to extend the regs because they expire in February. But the governor gave us the flexibility to adjust them based on what we've learned. But while we'll be extending it, I'm pretty sure I cannot speak for my other board members because we're a 5-member board. I can only talk to one on any issue, and we're probably all over the place on this, listening to people and having different views. I'm pretty sure we'll extend them, and then we want to be able to do some of that lightening of the load or recognize the issues that we feel are intelligible and implementable, explainable in the short run, but we will come up with better language, and I invite you to help us with this. I know we'll talk about this a little bit later, to really keep our eye on April. Because it's that April 1 combination of reservoirs and snowpack, and normally the rainy season's over in May, but April 1st we'll know. We get most of our precipitation in good years and other years in this January, usually through March band. Even when it came in March, it was the March Miracle. I was around during that. I don't know. Most of you probably were, because most people in the water world are lifers. Some of you may be new to it, and some of you are younger. I'm pointing that out. Some of you are, in fact, younger. And then we'll know. And so I think there's an opportunity for conversation about, does it just go away, to replace it? We can be I think it makes much more sense to really start talking about what do we do in April if it's looking really good. Drought may not be over, but that doesn't mean these have to continue. Or maybe a lot of people are talking about transitioning to something else that works for folks and recognizes the different situations that folks are in. And I'm starting to have very productive conversations with folks about that, and with our friends at DWR, for whom this is really their program. We just have the vehicle for doing things like emergency regs and regulations because we meet every other week, and we just have that's why we're doing the comfort level to do it. I want to just mention a couple other things. I just talked a lot about conservation, but there is that whole range of things. We talked about the Water Action Plan, which is that all of the above, and I am a total devotee of all of the above. We are not going to conserve and recycle our way to sustainability in the face of growth and climate change, growth alone. We're also not going to store and convey our way to the future. We got to do it all, and that's what the Water Action Plan says. We've got to figure out how to make our system work. We've got to do it all. We've got to do it as appropriate in lots of places, as opposed to spending the time arguing about which one it is. It's not, it's all of them. And you all know that because you're diversifiers and portfolio type people, but the dialogue in water has got to move quickly to that much more integrated and forward-thinking way. Fortunately, with Proposition 1, we're going to have a lot of money to help with. On recycling, as you know, we put out a lot of low-cost, we put out $800 million of 1% money. I think the last piece was just spoken for. We got another $800 million in line, and we just authorized going to the bond market for $1.2 billion, not just for that, but for infrastructure in general, which obviously will cost the state something, but we think it's important to seize this moment on infrastructure. So I encourage those of you who are interested to just work with us, because we really see this as a moment to be on all cylinders on all of the whole range of issues. With that, I'll just say one last thing, which is not really fun and is going to be really weird this year, which is I know many of you are very involved in the conversations about Delta Water Fix and the tunnels. I cannot talk to any of you about it until those hearings are over. In our system, our water board is a combination of the old Water Rights Board and the Water Quality Board, and now we have drinking water. So in one hat, we're quasi-legislative and sometimes quasi-judicial in when we're hearing petitions from regional boards. In water rights, we are like the water rights judges in other states, and it's just like a judge. I cannot even listen to you say it's good. And it's going to be weird, but we're going to be in months and months of hearings where we have to make the decisions that are true of any water rights petition for change, which is, will it hurt any other legal user of water, and will it unduly affect fish and wildlife, and are there conditions that can ameliorate that? It'll all be standard water rights law, 2 phases. The water user phase will start earlier this spring. We're having our first pre-hearing conference on it Thursday, and then the fish and wildlife portion will come later in the fall. But it will be evidentiary, adjudicatory, transparent, and in that role, so I will not be out talking and at conferences that many of you have seen me at, because I can't keep running out of the room when anyone ever brings it up. I spoke at that wonderful Aqua meeting. I mean, Kathy, I didn't go to the press briefing because I knew they were going to ask about it. I didn't listen to the governor's talk because it wasn't an open meeting. I didn't go to the State of the State, which may have been excessive because that went out. But it's just going to be strange for me because, you know, I'm very friendly and I like to talk and I like to listen and engage. And on that, I'm not. I'm like a judge. So I haven't decided whether I'm going to not be in room. I'm going to run out of room. I had to run out of that room twice. It was kind of funny. And then you know how to get me out of a party if you want me to go. Just raise your voice and say about that water fix, and then I have to leave and go somewhere else. But I think I'm going to get some headphones with really loud rock and roll on my phone and just put them on when everybody, you know, does it. So that's it. With that, I apologize because I will be out of sight for a while. And today, I know there may be people who want to ask about it, and other than that process, I can't talk about it.
Okay, so then these first 9 questions we're going to skip.
Yeah, right.
Are you ready?
I didn't notice any, but yes.
It appears the State Water Board will approve the extended emergency drought regs, but will review in April, as you suggest. In your mind, what triggers would lift the emergency conservation measures? Is there a snowpack or reservoir capacity that would, in your mind, suggest that?
There's not a specific one. We've been talking with DWR about it. I mean, there'll be a certain level at which the governor will withdraw the drought proclamation, in which case it goes away because it's for the life of it. I think something short of that could allow us to transition to something else, and the more we have a different glide path or a different idea that still maintains the vigilance, the better. I just think it will have to know, we tried to come up with triggers, but there's so many permutations. There may also be a situation that some have raised where different parts of the state are in very different situations as opposed to this massive concern, and I think we should take that into effect too. That's why it just seems, let's see where we are. We'll be talking through these 2 months, and then my interest is in figuring out how to move to what makes sense, either go away or figure out how to do something appropriate to the time, as opposed to, we can't let it all go now because it ain't over till it's over and we don't know. I mean, weather's been kind of weird, but it's encouraging start. But I am totally open to suggestion. Some people really got into this percent of snowpack, and I think that's more complicated than it needs to be.
So you'll let me know?
Well, or you let me know. I mean, really, I'll buy a drink for whoever comes up with the best idea. We just haven't gotten a winner yet.
Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
and I understand that it's a moving target, but I was wondering if maybe there was a range, but we're not quite ready to range yet. Okay.
I'm open to suggestions.
Well, I'm sure that this group is one that might provide
I'm
them.
like inviting it.
In that, they have shared this thought, that there's been a frustration by some water utilities that have made significant past investments in infrastructure, and they feel penalized that they can't utilize the supply under these current emergency regulations. There's no credit for indirect portable reuse investments prior to 2013, only limited credit for investments after that date. Would you agree that the current emergency regulations penalize water utilities that have made these investments? And would this have a tendency to discourage future investment? And lastly, what type of incentives would you support in the future to encourage water districts to continue investing in infrastructure and water supply?
Well, I think that's the when did you stop beating your wife framing of a question. But it's interesting.
I didn't write it, I'm just reading it.
I know. So I'm not, I think, actually, I felt people had very compelling arguments, which is why I'm inclined to support the staff recommendation to give some credits. I think, and they're significant, they're not significant because of the extent of the investment, and I think people have made a compelling case, again, to me, that it's been a challenge in messaging after spending so much time explaining to ratepayers how this is going to help drought-proof the community. And I have been saying everywhere anyone would listen that it is an amazing story that urban California has essentially done that for the 3 and 4 year drought cycle that we had seen in the last 100 years, and they've done it since the last big drought. And I think that that accomplishment is sort of drowned out in the noise of the worry about what if we're in the Australian situation, which is not what we've planned for, and figuring out how to be better safe than sorry. And I just think it behooves us to think about it. I think there are a lot of reasons to incentivize it. I think there's a choice for people to make in how they message. I think, frankly and understandably, a lot of people's feelings were hurt by how we did it because they felt that we didn't respect it, and that was certainly not the intent. We were just having a hard time in 3 weeks figuring out how to get that message out. And your initial thinking is not that you would use the most expensive water first. And some folks have not made a case that you can't use the water. They've made a case that it's a challenge in messaging. And so we've tried to give the tools for people to be able to message and feel comfort and a little bit of leeway without having to go back to 19 whenever that somebody wants to go back to. Again, emergency regulation, intelligible, simple, communicatable, and I think we've been able so far to roll this out in a way, in contrast to the folks who don't want us to change anything, or if anything, make it tougher. I think so far folks understand it, but often in the future, I mean, we put out incentives and money and all of that. We're behind you in making it happen, and there are even folks who are having challenges to their rate structure, and we volunteered to help with a work group. I've sent a couple letters so far when people thought a letter from us would be helpful to say, hey, we made them do this. That's going to be challenging, and investing in the future is really important, and that's noble and great and whatever, and I'm happy to do that for anyone. So there are a whole range of ways to try and help, and so I think we're trying our best to navigate that issue. That was one of the issues that folks most successfully, I think, really explained in this period of time in terms of the real world challenge that folks were facing. Because obviously resilience is a combination of efficiency, demand management, and extending supplies through all of these integrated water management things, and we absolutely want to be supporting that. Sorry, long answer.
That's all right. It's been a long time between rains, and we're delighted it's coming. We're delighted you're here, and I was delighted, I think, to hear you say that you could feel some inclination to accept staff recommendations that.
Well, for me, I can only speak for myself.
Yes, but what a leader you are.
Oh, yeah, right. There are 5, and we are all very strong-willed, but I'm hopeful.
As are we, Madam Chair. Metropolitan has a detailed process that they evaluate supply conditions, and they follow that, and they decide whether they should go into supply allocation and to what degree. The State Water Board's approach has been focused on the demand side, while the proposed extended drought regulations allow limited credit for sustainable supplies. Do you support a more balanced approach between supply and demand? And if so, what might that look like?
Well, what it might look like is what I'd love to hear from folks about. Because I don't actually have a set idea, but I agree that resilience is about both. And I am eager to get into that conversation. I mean, this is something we've been working with the DWR folks on. You all are very involved. I think we did find through the, when we tried the first round of regs, we tried to just ask people to implement their drought contingency plans at the level that mandated outdoor irrigation limits. That didn't work as well as folks thought it might, because they were apples, oranges, peaches, pears, and persimmons. And we had pushback from, what?
Apples, oranges, peaches, pears, persimmons.
They were just all different. I mean, it just wasn't one person's. What we heard from the different water agencies is that we actually had to set some more baseline standards, because they were having, that didn't feel fair, and we weren't really getting great results. And I actually think the answer is in coming up with some sort of resilience measure that that folks can meet and what the targets are. But I'd like it, my sense is that it'd be better to do it in the framework of the conversations you all are very comfortable with, whether it's urban water management planning or the efficiency standards, I don't know. There are some people who have more of a set idea, and I'm looking forward to talking about where we move from here and where we can be helpful. I mean, the governor has directed us to think of what ought to be permanent. Reporting is the piece. Some people have said some of the use restrictions. It wouldn't be all of the use restrictions. And then the question is, how did the state, and working with everyone here in a much more general process, figure out how to tune up the standards based on what we've learned. But I don't have a sense of what it should be. I'm open-minded.
But that's good. How would you feel about the question that farmers have the largest entitlement, other than environment, I suppose? Should farmers have should they have a place at the table discussing water issues?
They are all over the table discussing water issues. I mean, that's interesting misconception in big parts of urban California. Farmers, and that's a broad category, tend to have the most senior water rights under our water rights system. In urban California, folks don't think about the water rights system as much, particularly in Southern California, where everybody's junior. Folks have figured out how to bring water long distances or be more resilient, use groundwater basins. You actually have adjudicated basins down here, very well managed. Farmers live by a very different code. It's 100% cutoff if you're junior to the next most senior, and there are folks who've gotten nothing. And we've curtailed them, and we're in enforcement proceedings, and it's been a huge deal. If you're up there, that's why I say it's nice to be down here. That we're arguing over water rights that date before 1914, and it's very harsh. Now, it's interesting because though in agriculture, we've been trying to figure out how to protect economic uses. That's why we focus on, I'm not trying to pick on lawns, but Brett, I'm really not trying to pick on lawns, but we've been focused on where the water is, because some people overwater their lawns, which seems in a crisis to be not perhaps the best use, where we tried really hard to protect economic uses of water, and agriculture certainly is one of those. I mean, the average urban person, their footprint from their food is a lot more than they ever use on their lawn. So I feel there's a bit of an artificial divide sometimes in that. But the same token of the developed water in California, ag uses 40%, urban uses 10%. But, farmers aren't growing that just to, put in a bonfire and have a party and pat themselves on the back. They're feeding people in urban areas and across the country and the world.
And a big break for our economy. I didn't realize that we have a $1.6 billion dairy export out of California.
You probably do.
I was amazed by that. I mean, you think of other places because of, that was the way I was raised. I didn't realize that California had such a huge dairy issue.
Well, it's shifted. It's been some folks here have really worked on that over the years, but it moved. We surpassed Wisconsin some years ago in the 90s. I remember working on that when I was at EPA. But and almonds, I mean, we supply 50% of fruits, vegetables, and nuts, in some cases of the whole country, 90% of other things.
Yeah.
So it's actually, one of only 5 Mediterranean climates in the world that can do that. That said, there's work to be done in ag efficiency and all of that folks have thought about, but it's a much more complicated arena because one person's flood irrigation is another person's return flow or a groundwater recharge, and we're just grappling with that with the Groundwater Management Act. I mean, here virtually everything's adjudicated or managed. Up there, it's not, and it's rather alarming. But there are a lot of farmers who've gotten zero water. They've either been curtailed their water rights, or because they get project water, they've had zero allocations for a couple of years. And we're spending time with a lot of areas where we're delivering water in tankers and bottles and communities. So it's been devastating agriculture, but very uneven because of just the nature of how our water rights laws work. But if you tried to change that, you have investment and low-cost food production that would wreak havoc. So it's just more complicated. That wasn't a very good answer. It's just, we are absolutely looking at it. And I just have to say one piece that's a misnomer. Some people say 80-20, but it's 80-20 of developed water. I said that wrong. The 50% for the environment is also a misnomer. And so I have been out defending ag pretty vigorously because I just don't think it's fair to pick on ag. It's all very complicated. By the same token, it's not fair to say, well, 50% of the water goes to the environment, because like 2/3 of that are the North Coast wild and scenic rivers that Ronald Reagan took off the table, but also which are not entirely capturable. More could have been in the project, but that decision was made a long time ago. So that's 2/3 of it. Of the third that's left, 2/3 of that, this is to maintain salinity control in the delta, because otherwise the tidal flows would make it too salty for human use or agriculture in the delta or for export to send. So people forget all that. So there's a little sliver that is purely a fish flow, and we slash those during the drought. So I always just say a pox on all those pie charts, but it's a very complex picture.
Well, I always like pie.
I really like pie.
And I like food, so I'm really behind the agriculture folks. The people out here in Southern California in general, the folks in Orange County in specific, have shown that they're willing to work. They've shown that they're willing to take the steps to reduce the watering. They've shown they're willing to invest in the future. Metropolitan's put hundreds of millions of dollars out and put it right on the table to take care of actions. We have one of the finest recycling programs at the Orange County Water District. You're keenly aware of that. Well, Poseidon has been working, heavy lifting. It's got the desal facility up and running in Carlsbad. They have the Coastal Commission, I think, coming up in May, looking to get that approval that they might move that forward. We have people in the county now looking to say what's the next step on that. But I have 3 more questions, and then we have a microphone. Many of our customers have lost trees and experienced health effects from the loss of turf and increased dust. And I'm learning to play trombone. And increasing heat sink effects without ground cover. Will the state be examining the long-term impacts of this?
Well,
I thought I had this under control.
Well, I think it's an important issue. I mean, it's interesting because I've been trying my best in every press briefing to beg reporters to write about watering trees, because we don't want to lose trees for all of those reasons, but people have to learn how to do the slow drip. And I know I'm sure many of your agencies, and I've seen other agencies that have done really good jobs of explaining to homeowners how they should be watering the trees versus being an ancillary to watering the lawn, where you end up with very shallow roots. Much better for the tree to do soaker hoses, so their roots have to go down. They get stability pretty much the same length away as the crown of the tree. I am very worried about that, but we've been trying to get that message out. Save Our Water has a whole section on that, but I'm hoping that you all are trying to get those messages to folks. My concern is in some areas, folks are so keen on recycling that or so keen on conservation that they're conserving too much. They're not watering their trees, they're just turning it off, which is absolutely not the message. The message was to put the lawn on life support. And we look to you all to be able to send those messages. I think in those communities where it's particularly challenging, our staff has been willing to work on alternative compliance measures where people say what they really can do. Another issue that's come up through this that I think is really important is that we do have some communities that are relying on swamp coolers. Those take a lot of water. Well, you don't want people to change out we don't want them to have to buy an air conditioner. We're trying to not do cost. So there are a whole host of issues in given communities that we're willing to work through. But I do think that water agencies should also be messaging. Again, I know it's hard to get complex messaging out, but it's not the most complicated messaging in the world to tell people to please water their trees.
It is tough. For those of you who don't know, I have a paper route in the mornings. Our house is defended by the attack basset, Miss Abigail. And Abigail and I go out every morning about 6:15, and we take our morning walk, and we take the newspaper and we throw it up on the porch, because that's about the only exercise I get anymore. So Abigail and I are out doing our paper route, and we note that there are some homes that have quit watering. They haven't cut back, they have quit. What bothers Abigail is that when they quit watering, they let their gardener go.
Oh, yeah?
When they let the gardener go, the other parts of the maintenance of the home seem to fall behind. And you have a very nice area that all of a sudden is starting to get touched by blight. I know that was none of our intents, none of what's going on, but when a water district provides a fine for using more water than they're told that they should use, and some folks don't want to pay that, they go to these measures. Will the over-reducing districts, those who have surpassed their conservation targets, be able to roll banked savings past February?
You know, it's interesting. I do remember that issue coming up, but we have not talked about that. That is an interesting. I think if we've been trying to do cumulative in order to do that, so I guess we have to decide that. I like the cumulative approach because it allows you, and we've been trying. I've had trouble with headlines where people want to go to, they didn't make it this month. And if you've seen, I like go to great pains to lecture. The reporters say this is a cumulative target. We always knew it would be harder. In fact, the fact that people are saving 20% in the winter is amazing. And that means people are saving it indoors, which it sort of, please, don't not put the kettle on for your tea. I mean, drink all you want. Take your, bathe. But take a shower. 1 minute shower, those are best if you can do that. Except when you have to wash your hair. I mean, you get into way too much detail about people's lives. But I think people have done amazingly well. And I've been able to, because we've been talking to these reporters so much, I feel a little bit like a schoolmarm lecturing them all the time. But the headline writers always kind of get it wrong. But
I don't know. I mean, there's certain things
it'll be
that you give
cumulative,
up when you're a public figure. But I don't know, does somebody here work for Facebook? I mean, I've got a question here. When you're not being chased by an angry mob, what do you like to do for fun? What is your favorite color? I mean, you can answer that if you want to, but I don't know that you're actually required so to do.
sleep.
Is that the power nap on Sunday afternoon? Or
No,
just
that's sleeping all
sleep
weekend.
in
I
late until
sleep.
5 o'clock?
That's when I sleep. Yeah. Sleep, play with grandson, Teal.
Good for you. Because at the end of the day, the work we're doing here is important, and it's made more important by those of us who have joined the club of grandparents, because that's one of the reasons we want to make sure we have clean air, clean water, and a decent supply, and a big enough supply that I don't have to drive to Victorville, not that there's anything wrong with Victorville, to see my grandkids. So, the last question I have, and then we'll go to the audience if that's okay with you.
That was great.
Is if the currently proposed water pricing amendment is adopted, will the state board have the authority to mandate water prices at the local level?
What, you mean the initiative?
I'll let you read it.
I don't know.
I
doubt that. That would
told
be
you,
the last thing I would want to do.
I just read them here. There's a couple I couldn't read. They were multisyllabic.
I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
I don't think
Toss
we
that
should.
one over here.
I think this has been an extraordinary period, and I actually believe in subsidiary. I think pricing is the last time. I'm happy to be helpful in trying to help folks hurdle roadblocks or figure out how to get support. But that's the last thing I would want to do. You wouldn't want me to do that. We don't have the expertise. That's up to you.
I think that is correct. I don't think that would be something we would enjoy seeing coming down the road. My friend Jonathan has a microphone that he can pass among you, and giving you a chance to correct whatever question I misread, or for those of you, I won't mention any names, Mr. Fiore, who just don't want to write down a question. But I mean, if you have one, here's your chance.
But it would be nice if you said what your favorite color was before you.
Yes.
Go to the director, Andrew, and we'll get you, director. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Castle. Thank you so much for coming today and speaking to all of us. I believe one of the first or second questions that was asked was about our snowpack and whether or not there's a range that we can say, if we have enough snowpack, the drought's over, we can stop these regulations and don't need to renew them in February. What do you feel that, I know it's a very difficult thing to monitor compared to some of our reservoirs. What do you feel that our knowledge is of our snowpack, and can we do more to better monitor it, to be able to do the research to better be able to answer that question?
Oh, it's not so much, I think we know snowpack, we have pretty good measurement assessment. It's just that it's a combination of snowpack and reservoir storage. And groundwater's been tremendously depleted. We're not going to wait until that's restored because that's going to be years. And the poor, particularly in the valley, folks who are struggling to come up with these groundwater sustainability, and a lot of great effort is going in now that's really encouraging, but it's going to be really hard for them, as those of you know who've been in groundwater management and have to do step down demand reduction. That's a long-term prospect, because you don't, again, you want to maintain people's economic vitality, but they have a lot of heavy lifting and hard work to get. We're not waiting for that. I do think that it's a combination of the reservoirs. If you look right now, it's I'm sure it's on DWR's website. It'll be on we get it on our website because it was presented to us. Our reservoirs are still at a fraction of average for this time of year even. So we are still in a very deep hole. Snowpack in some places is up to 125% of normal for this time of year. So the key is that I am open to us dialing this back substantially or transitioning to something else before the drought is over. It all depends on what situation we're in. We were asked to do this because we were at an uh-oh point where we had the worst snowpack in 500 years, in addition to low reservoirs. Not as low as the year before, they were a little bit better, but that loss of snowpack was this huge, oh my God, what if we're in Australia territory? Better to be safe than sorry. And I think many of us made a choice that we would rather have people angry at us this year, at this time of year, if we had a lot of rain and snow, than what if we hadn't acted and it happened again. And then again, because this is a long run. And so it was as I said last time, I don't wrap myself in the flag around the decision. It was a choice. Someone had to make the choice. The governor made the choice. We implemented the choice, a valid choice, but it has had, and I predicted, unintended consequences to folks' budget, to their effort, to people, and so I want to figure out how to be helpful with that. So I don't think there's a number, but it's got to be healthy. So if in April we're at 100 and something percent of snowpack and our reservoirs are above average, then we're having a very different conversation. Because if you look at that, then we're not in that emergency place. Right now, we're still in the emergency room in terms of our system, which so much of California is dependent on because the state project and the federal project more for the Central Valley is such a big part of the water supply for the mass of our population and our agriculture, because that's been a boom in the post-war era, as opposed to the folks who are senior water rights holders and the like. So it just looking at that overall impact is really important. But some folks are focusing on when the drought will be over, and that's a different question than the emergency regs. It'd also be a mistake to sort of toss the whole thing out and say, phew, the way the Australians did. So there are as many views I've found as there are people, because I do like talking to people one-on-one, even within the same agency, even as to what we ought to do. There are also a lot of people who want to take advantage of this to move to something that they want, and I'm trying very hard to think about, from a civics and public policy, what is appropriate. And I want us out of the emergency regulation arena and into productive collaboration using our tools as soon as we can. I don't think it should go away prematurely, but I think we stepped in an emergency because we had certain tools, and now we've had this season to think about it, and we have an opportunity to think more creatively about where we go forward, and having a healthy snowpack and healthy reservoirs really gives us the breathing room, not to wait until the next drought, but to get in gear. And so I've been encouraging people to give us their ideas on where we go next. And a lot of people are doing some thinking about it. And I hope that's helpful. It's just, some people want the math, and particularly if they're engineers. Sorry, I love engineers, but or ISTJs on the Myers-Briggs type, they want to know the number. And I think that's boxing yourself in. So
Some of my best friends are engineers.
I love, I mean, I spent 12 years managing engineer.
Okay.
I love translating for engineer
I mean, okay.
to regular people.
You remember how you tell the extroverted engineer from the introverted engineer? The extrovert looks at your shoes instead of his when he's talking to you. Sorry, Carl, just kidding. I found the other question, one of the other questions I was looking for. I knew I had them. Australia, you're talking about your trip to Australia. They consolidated some water districts. Do you see the need to consolidate some of the state's smaller water districts? And would there be financial incentives to consolidate? And then there would be liabilities for the assuming party? What would the state do if they decided this was something to be appropriate?
Well,
Or would you make that decision?
We actually got legislation passed. The legislation was passed last year that gives us the power to consolidate, and it removes liability for the assuming entity, and it says we have to help pay for it. So I think that it happened really quickly.
And you have to help pay for it?
You're not going to force somebody to assume. Some of these need remedial work. I mean, we actually have $526 million from the bond to help disadvantaged communities. This is for disadvantaged communities. There are some people out there talking about how many water districts we have and what would be a perfect world. I'm less interested in that.
You're more concerned with the disadvantaged communities?
Yeah, because of Australia, I mean, yeah, sure, if you wanted a simpler system, you would have fewer agencies, and you might have more, you can always do the theoretical, but the fact is, we have local water agencies for a reason, and folks are very proud, and local control is important to us. In Australia, they went on a consolidation binge in the 90s, and they consolidated from hundreds of agencies to a few, but they have a completely different system. I mean, they're socialist compared to us, particularly even though they're very market-based, and they have a parliamentary system. They can make big decisions. They have a much bigger collective sense, and I don't say that's good or not. I mean, they changed their water rights system in 1906 to water sharing because they thought that the system that they had and that we still have was not very neighborly, my word, not theirs, and they share. There's more of a collective sense. They allocate the water together. We don't have anything like that. But they also went on a binge to have fewer water agencies, and they regulate them to create a competitive market because they were also on a markets binge, and they realized that to be competitive they wanted. We're just in a very different setting. The one place where consolidation seems more imperative is in those cases where we have these small communities that just can't do it, and they're right next door to others where if they got together it would work better. And I think we proposed only 2, maybe 3, and there's a lot of process, and we're trying to go with folks that want to, or folks that are, we have folks where they built all the pipes and then they, backed out, and they did it with all of our money. So we're being very, I suspect we may do a few of those a year. It's not big, but I think it's an opening, and an opening to also be able to help those larger agencies, like some out in Southern California, who actually want to incorporate folks but didn't want to take on their liability or take on additional costs for their own ratepayers, and we want to be able to help those guys. But I don't think it's a massive, I mean, maybe people will push for it, and in a perfect world, you'd draw it differently, but I actually don't, that's not where I would go.
Jonathan desperately wants me to let him ask a question, but I just can't get there yet. When I was a little boy, once upon a time, I was having trouble making a decision, so I was going to flip a coin. And this wise man grabbed it before I caught it. And he said it was going to be heads, yes, and tails, no. He said, which one do you want it to be? But while the coin was in the air, I had kind of developed a feeling of which way I wanted it to be. Prior to that, I had really been torn. So if we had this coin and tossed in the air, you being familiar with Orange County, we don't know where our next frontier is. Should it be more recycling? Should it be more desal? If there was a coin toss, which way do you think it should land for local decision makers in Orange County?
Well, don't you think I'm a big portfolio believer. I mean, again, I think many places have made the decision that stormwater capture and recycling, if you have a groundwater basin, is cheaper. And some people really like to say, I think in the San Diego situation where they don't have a groundwater basin, they have to spend a lot more. I've always asked Maureen when we were frequently together, I said, I bet you wish you had a groundwater basin like San Gabriel. And yes, she wishes she had a groundwater. basin. And we're sending millions of acre feet of water out in large outfalls that could, you got gravity working against you, but you do with desal too. I just think there's a portfolio. A lot of people are looking at brackish desal and more creative ways to do that. But I do believe that it's up to local agencies to figure out what mix works for them. I do think desal honestly has different externalities. And we did our policy to try and level the playing field and have rules of the road on marine impacts, and that will play out. And they're significant. People may want to write them out of sight, out of mind, but they are, in fact, significant and need to be mitigated as compared to other things. So, do no harm.
Should we throw Jonathan the bone, let him ask?
Oh,
one?
we should.
Jonathan,
He's
go
been
ahead.
so good.
Good evening, Madam Chairman. My name's Tom Lindsay. I'm the mayor of Yorba Linda.
Oh, hi.
I would guess that you've heard of our little community. We are a
Yes,
36% mandate community. So it's been stressful for us.
Yes.
I'm also an invited guest tonight of our local water board. And it turns out that, at least for me, and I think my council, we have a lot of faith in our water board. We believe they're doing the right thing. And they're doing all they can to comply. Our grass medians are all dead. They're not brown, but they're dead. So we're struggling with what to do with them afterwards and those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But so far, we've kept we've kept pace with the mandate. And I think we're
amazing.
still at 38%. So I do want to thank you, Madam Chair, for being here, for listening. And we appreciate the credit idea. I think it's a wonderful idea. Here's my question.
Mm-hmm.
With all that we've done, it's still counterintuitive for our citizens, and we're the largest customer of our local agency, so it is in that light that I ask you this question. We continue to see that the citizens feel it's counterintuitive to use less water and continue to pay more, although we understand it. So this puts the local water district under tremendous pressure from our citizens, to the extent that a group has filed suit against us for the 218 vote that
Right.
they went through.
Right.
So all that to say, here's my question.
Yeah.
I have always wondered if the state, having such a strong control of the mandate situation, will somehow support the local agency from a legal perspective as these processes adjudicate through the system, and these taxpayer associations or whomever it might be challenge the system and challenge the 218s and challenge the rate increases and the penalties. If the state may take some helpful attitudes to protect our local agencies. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think that's valuable. I mean, the governor, in one of his executive orders, directed us to work with agencies to help on rates and pricing. And there's been a work group that's been working on that really for a number of months. And we had a big workshop on it, asking people what we could do to be helpful. And there's a website to try and be of assistance. And we've offered to help agencies. I've been in conversation with Yorba Linda. You have a very challenging situation. To the extent that people find it helpful to get support from us, other agencies have asked to explain, as I said, that you've taken these extraordinary steps, you've done it incredibly well, and we're very grateful for it, and that needing to invest in the future and in the system is really, really important. And we're open to any suggestions of how we can be helpful. Not everybody wants our help. They'd want us to just disappear. But we're trying to figure out how to be as helpful as we can. I mean, this is an era in which there's a challenge, and I know it's challenging to talk to ratepayers, and that counterintuitive that your rate goes up when you've saved water. The total amount you pay doesn't need to go up, but it needs to go up to invest in the future. So there's a two-part piece there. But what requires is a different level of communication with ratepayers and helping explain that fact. I mean, it's true in other contexts, and I think we just all have to get better at explaining the whole system and the incredible service that's provided by water agencies. And so to the extent we can be helpful, we want to be as helpful as we can, in addition to coming up with more innovative financing tools, including grants and loans, to help defray the cost of some of those future investments. But it has always been a challenge to explain in conservation. It's the same is true. They've been through this in energy, for years to get people to understand that here's your system cost, it costs to run it, and then there's the investments for the future. It's just we don't have the same system that we have in the regulated utilities, which are like 17 or 18% of the water world. It's the CPUC tells them what they can do, so they don't have to go through the local rate structure. In energy, because of physics, you have a lot of large investor-owned utilities that do all that rate setting, and there's maybe 20% that have to go to their own rate. It's just an interesting flip, and so the burden is on you to make these decisions as opposed to you don't want the system where we tell you what to do, but it's just a different setting. But even in the energy arena, they have years of trying to figure out how to explain this to folks. But you've got to explain the system and what the investments are and all of that. Not easy, but happy to help in whatever way is helpful to you. I don't want to just meddle in ways that aren't. So we've done draft letters. We've let folks look at it to make sure that it's actually helpful, and then I'll send it. So, and very happy to help. Blue River Wind has done an extraordinary job under very difficult circumstances, and you have that whole wildland. You have all kinds of issues, and I know it's been a nightmare. Very happy to try and help in ways that you deem helpful.
My, oh my, would you look what I found.
Oh no, my goodness.
You know, the last time we were here, you received a bottle of wine. I understand you had to fly home and couldn't take that wine with you. There's no wine. There's a box. And if you open this hand-tooled, highly desirable, much coveted, first time ever offered Municipal Water District of Orange County,
Perfect.
glittering like a diamond in a goat's belly button, the OC Tap Water Award. On January 22nd, 2016, the Municipal Water District of Orange County hosted a water policy forum and dinner featuring keynote speaker Felicia Marcus, chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Hundreds of leaders throughout the Southern California joined together to hear Ms. Marcus speak on the continuation of Governor Brown's historic executive order, which directed the State Water Resources Control Board to implement mandatory water restrictions in urban areas to reduce potable water use by 25% statewide.
Whoa.
All of this emblazoned on this flagon of much desired, highly coveted, and pretty doggone costly Orange County water.
You are
This
so.
is for you.
That is fantastic. Thank you. That is precious.
Now, you think we haven't got creative people at MODOC. I'm not going to say that I did that,
That's amazing.
because I didn't. But if anybody knows Tiffany, I think you can figure out who did, because I'm not going to mention any names. Ladies and gentlemen, I do appreciate you being here. There are many people that worked hard to make this evening enjoyable for you. Besides the good dinner companionship of those that are at your tables, there was the MODOC staff, which worked hard. And, you know, this was a time we did. Thank you. Thank you very much. They really do deserve that. And then the Weston staff always does a crackerjack job. I mean, one of the things I have rarely heard, and I have heard it occasionally, but rarely, you know, when you're feeding this many people, they get the food out, it's hot, it tastes good. The stuff that's supposed to be cold is still cold, it tastes good. It's kind of a nice thing when it works out like that. The Weston has done a fine job, and we appreciate that support. More importantly, as I said, we appreciate your support. On behalf of our board and our new president, thank you for making this trip. Drive slowly
Thank
going
you.
home. We want you to come back next quarter.
Thank you all very much for having me.